Popcorn junkies, welcome to this Mission Impossible, The Final Reckoning. Could this be little Tom's final outing in the Mission Impossible franchise? Now, before we get going, in the spirit of transparency, not necessarily been a total Mission Impossible loyalist from the get-go. I've caught them on and off over the years. More often than not, I've caught them when I just fancy a hit of, mainstream action cinema without much sort of in the way of having to think, but just wanting just a bit of a theme park ride and a bit of stress and a bit of fun. So they're not to be taken seriously. They're kind of, in a way, they're sort of America's answer, or the American Hollywood answer. James Bond is Hollywood, but James Bond is British as well. He's a sort of American answer to James Bond. And I would argue that in recent years, the Mission Impossible films have been perhaps more successful and more dramatic and more spectacular to watch than even the James Bond films. Now, this is, as I say, this is The Final Reckoning. This is very much sort of the sequel to, was it Dead Reckoning, in which I think me and my mother reviewed that film, and they had the entity, which was the villain was AI, which I always think is quite rich. It's quite rich, and I was listening to an interview with the director Christopher McQuarrie, who was saying, look, with this second film, we can really get, the audience will really get on board with the idea of AI as we sit on the cusp of our very own real-world artificial intelligence Armageddon. Making AI, or the entity, the villain, is quite a good thing. I know a number of people have said the name, the entity, it's shit, but the names of most sort of AI type things are shit, aren't they? So the entity. So obviously this stars Tom Cruise. What are your thoughts on Tom Cruise? What's your favourite Tom Cruise film? I've always liked Tom Cruise when he does those kind of weird things on the margins. Was he in Magnolia? That strange moment or a couple of moments in Tropic Thunder, where he played the sort of Hollywood exec. I went into this just thinking, oh my God, this is just going to be knock 'em about fun. I was coming out of COVID, or I was in the foothills of coming out of COVID. And I thought, I just fancy some kind of I fancy some visual popcorn. I just want to go in and just turn off and escape the horrors of the world and just worry about something completely unrelated to my real life. And this whacks in at 3 hours or 2 hours 50 minutes. So it's a big commitment. It's a big commitment. I went in at 7:30. I came out at midnight. I was like, what the fuck? Where am I? What's going on? It's a long, epic goodbye, you could argue, to Ethan Hunt. Now, one of the problems whenever you come to the end of a franchise or the end of a series, is there's a kind of duty, almost a sort of burden of responsibility to kind of attend to all of those characters that various different viewers are fond of. You've got to get all the usual characters in there. You've got to kind of pay reference to them all. You've got to get a bit nostalgic. And I have to say, one thing I did like in this, quite early on in the setting of this film, was we were delivered a montage of sorts as one of the kind of Secret Service guys kind of reminded us of Tom Cruise's achievements, if you like, across all the Mission Impossible films. And I'm a sucker for a movie montage. I love a movie montage. And so when this movie montage happened, I found myself getting goosebumps, or as I call them, Bieber bumps. Justin Bieber was and I was like, I didn't know half the references. I didn't really know all the films, but I recognised some of them. And I was thinking, oh my God, Vanessa Redgrave was in one of them. Oh my God, he was in one of them too. And so I thought, and it was nice. It was clever because it was a reminder of just how long this franchise has been with us. I think it's been with us since 1990. Am I right in thinking that was it Brian? Don't tell me Brian De Palma directed the first one. Anyway, it's been around a while. And of course, Tom has been with us all the way. And what is he now? 60, 61, 62? He seems to be getting smaller. And yet, quite notable is the fact that he's got long hair in this film. But we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. So let's chop this film into 3 acts. And this really is, in quintessential fashion, a film of 3 acts. And the first act, I would say, is the most boring. The first act really is quite, I have to confess, turgid, tedious, and beyond boring, bar the kind of outward reference to all the other Mission Impossibles, where I had a kind of little floaty feeling of Hollywood nostalgia. It's very dialogue heavy. It's very involved in having to do a number of things. It's having to backfill and back reference and give us a catch-up, really, of where we're at with the entity, where we are in this story arc. It's also then having to do a lot of the heavy lifting around telling us in quite an emotional way about Ethan Hunt and how, this is the mission to end all missions and we're back here. And, I love how simple that it gets, because even messages like he put a VHS in a top-loading VHS cassette machine. And when they self-destruct, it's always so disappointing. I love it. It's so sort of rubbish. But this is, so this front hour was very, very verbose. There was a lot of talking. There was a lot of scene setting. There was a lot of explication. There was a lot of scenes in which what I call a sort of triangular scenes where lots of 3, 4 characters are standing in a space and looking at each other, rarely in the same shot, because I'm imagining with a film like this with so many characters, they can rarely get all the same actors in the same place at the same time. So they have to sort of film them kind of coming out of the imaginary Trafalgar Square station and looking to the left, and then Hayley Atwell looks to the right, and then Simon Clegg looks over there. Simon Pegg looks over there, etc. You know what I mean? Lots of looking, lots of sizzling in looks, lots of simmering, lots of brooding, lots of looking. And I was kind of reminded that Tom doesn't do irony. And I think this is one of the problems, my problems with Tom. He needs to be a bit more ironic, like he was in things like Tropic Thunder and was it Magnolia? There's no irony. And I think one of the things I do like about James Bond is there is irony. And they do strive for comedy in the Mission Impossible films, but it's kind of an obvious type of comedy. And I do think that the thing that I was reminded of very quickly in this front hour was this really is a Tom Cruise production of a Tom Cruise film. And the credits actually said that. So anyway, this front hour reminds us that we're dealing with the entity, AI. So, you know, I like that as a villain. I like it nebulous. I thought the graphics were a bit shit, a bit obvious, sort of floaty smoke and all that kind of stuff. But I have to say, the first thing that I had to really struggle to get to grips with in this film was Tom Cruise's long hair. What the fuck? Well, you know, he's got hair in this film that when he takes helmets off, because he wears lots of helmets, he wears lots of things on his head, he's often upside down, he's often coming out of things where his hair has to move. I thought for continuity, this was an absolute nightmare. I mean, either he was wanting to show off just how her suit he is without having necessarily had to have a hair transplant at his grand old age. But he's got long hair, but it's coupled with, I'm not for a minute kind of cosmetic shaming anyone, but has he had any tweakments? I feel he may have had some tweakments, because he looked fresh-faced in a not very fresh way. It was odd. So there's a fresh face beneath very sort of long hair. I mean, longer than mine, and sort of, you know, and in some shots, I'm not entirely sure it was the best look for him. But yeah, anyway, so, you know, no, but he's got long hair. But also the other thing I was reminded of in lots of these scenes where he's looking at people, and there's a moment where he has to sort out the first emergency, the first action scene. You know, he's blokey. Tom has a certain sort of blokey. He does blokey. He doesn't do gooey love, but he's a sort of it's a blokey chappy kind of love. It's a blokey chappy kind of. He's awkward in his broness. He's kind of like, he's one of those guys you meet, you go in to hug, and he'll go in for the hug, but then he'll suddenly, at the last minute, he'll just give his shoulder. Because he wants to be more intimate, but he doesn't want to open himself to that side of himself that could suggest that actually it's going to get messy, and my involvement with you as a person is just going to become really complicated and just authentic. And so you could sort of, he's kind of, and he's quite stiff, and he's quite small, and he's got floppy hair, and but he's blokey, and he's, you know, so that camaraderie between him and all of the other sort of supporting members of his team, you know, you've got Ving Rhames, who plays Luther. You know, he's on his deathbed. He's in a cell under London somewhere, sort of with lots of machinery, but still doing his thing. You know, Simon Pegg, or Simon Clegg, love child of Nick Clegg. You know, it's a bloke. I mean, it's all a bit blokey. Yeah, blokey banters. You know, when you think he's tearful, when you think he might get a bit tearful, he sort of leans in for he does the lean in hug type thing, and he runs everywhere. I mean, you know, the thing about Bond and Mission Impossible is tech. We've got dealing with AI in this, high tech. But the first emergency in this film, and he's running across Westminster Bridge, and no one runs like Tom. No one runs like Tom. Tom runs he doesn't go up or down. He's like a bullet. He's like a human version of a bullet. A tiny bullet just racing with little feet across Westminster Bridge. Flapping hair, which I could presume, maybe it sort of helped him. Maybe his new hair gave him a certain kind of, kind of whatever. So he kind of scoots along. And so we had a moment in the first hour where we had an emotional moment. I think it was in the first hour. I mean, I have to confess, the plot, you can either decide to really understand the plot in detail and then come out of a film like Mission Impossible and go, yeah, I really like the way in which, or you just kind of go, I kind of got the idea. He's after him, he's trying to do that, and they're all after them. So you've got Gabriel, who's kind of this baddie, very good looking baddie, sort of feel like he's going to break into a tango at any point. You've got Luther, who's in the Arches, dying, and I think he dies quite quickly. I can't remember. We definitely lost him, but they didn't sort of hover over it. Maybe they just didn't want to really lose him in a horrible way. And basically, it's told to us that the entity is essentially the nuclear arsenals of every country in the world are going to be compromised, or have been compromised, or are in the process of being compromised. We keep coming to this enormous map of the world, and that's fucking Britain's gone, or China's gone, and he's got half a crucifix key. He's got a crucifix key, and he's getting another crucifix key. I know because I've seen all the press. He has to go to a submarine. There was a submarine in the last one. I can't remember where it landed somewhere. I think it's on the Great Barrier Reef. It's underwater, and we know he's got to go there. He's got to unplug something. He's got to plug something in. He's got to get something out, and he's got to rescue it and bring it back and all that stuff. So yeah, all that setup, so wordy. And I can only think that the reason the front hour was so wordy was everyone on board with this is like, this is the last film, guys. We've got to give it some real kind of heft and some emotional gravitas, and we've got to give it, it's got to be meaningful. And so they sort of laden it with not necessarily meaning, but just lots of explaining. It kind of got boring. So we've got one team, Hayley Atwell and Simon, are sort of now in the Arctic with a former CIA guy who's got the coordinates to the submarine. Then you've got Tom Cruise flies out to an aircraft carrier. He's convinced the president to give him permission to use an aircraft carrier. Tom Cruise, he can use anything. And he's going to use that aircraft carrier to then go into the sea and then hopefully get onto find the submarine. So we have, and Hayley Atwell's good. I like Hayley Atwell in this. She's his female, what's her character's name? Hayley Atwell's great. Hannah Wadigan turns up on the aircraft carrier. She's sort of ubiquitous everywhere, isn't she? She's statuesque. And that's about it in this. She's statuesque. Hayley Atwell plays Grace. I like Hayley Atwell. There's some great moments in this where there's one scene, I can't remember where it comes in the madness of all of it, but she's kind of giving him mouth to mouth. Oh yeah, after he comes out of the sea. And when she's giving mouth to mouth, the camera shot is so obviously just showing her cleavage. I mean, the one thing that would bring you round is, well, in fact, I would pretend not to come round, so that Hayley Atwell had to breathe more air into me so I could see more heavingness of chest just above me. But it was kind of very kind of flirtatiously kind of shot. Anyway, Tom Cruise is very serious in this. I mean, I do know that he likes to smile. He likes a sort of cheeky chappy smile. He's a fan of the impish smile as he turns. He likes to turn with a bit of a grin. No turning in grins. This was serious stuff. This was almost pseudo-religious. And in fact, there's an argument that you could argue that this film is the last temptation of Christ. This is almost the Last Supper. This whole film has a sort of messianic aspect to it. Anyway, Act 2 starts. At this point, I'm thinking, fucking hell, I can't take much more of this. This is boring. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that whilst it's not necessarily a particularly actiony scene, I found Act 2 in which Ethan leaps into the sea. His hair is all long. I have to say his whole head, a bit like, you know, when you get to a certain age as a man and as women, and your heads become heavier, they become bigger. The nose becomes a little bit more sort of just of a thing rather than a nose, and jowly, things become jowly. You know, we all are heading inexorably as men over a certain age, or we're all trying to dodge the iceberg that is Piers Morgan's head. We're like, oh God, how do we dodge that? I think someone like Hugh Grant has succeeded in that. But the trade-off is that he's got lots of wrinkles. And so we're all kind of thinking as men, oh, how do I get past this Piers Morgan thing? And Tom Cruise, I think, has thought that by removing all facial lines, he can do that. But it's still a 60-year-old head. You come around to the side and you go, oh, he's 60 with floppy hair. He needs to smile more. I think he wants to smile more, but I think he feels that everything's just a bit too serious. It's the last one, and he can't be having a good time. There's no space here for brevity or fun. This is serious work. And he goes down and he swims all the way down, and he mustn't breathe, and if he does breathe he might die and all this kind of stuff. Oh, by the way, before he goes down to the actual sub, he's gone down to the sub, the American sub, and guess who's in the American sub with him? Milchick, the guy who plays Milchick from Severance. He's there, and he's as good as he is in Severance, although he's not dancing and kicking and high kicking and all that kind of stuff. We get Milchick, which is really nice. A fight scene. Someone tries to kill him. If I call it the sexy shower scene. I don't think anyone's having a shower. But is he having a shower? I think he might be having a shower. Anyway, at some point, someone tries to stab old Tom Cruise. And they accidentally, I think, pierce or puncture one of the pipes, and then you've got sort of mist and gas and hiss and water and everything sort of flying around. It's like a shower scene, mad kind of all this hissing water and gas. Anyway, Tom Cruise foils that and gets past that. Anyway, and then he's going to be sent out. So he's so fucking cool. He's gone from aircraft carrier into the sea, into a submarine. Now he's going to come out of this submarine and he's going to go even deeper, which he does. And the submarine sequence where he goes down towards the nuclear sub, where he has to put the key in, the crucified, the Pope's key. and unlock some weird thing. I love this. We then enter about 15 minutes of some really atmospheric, no script, no dialogue, no voice. And this film really is at its best when there's no dialogue, when there's no scriptwriter writing dialogue. It's great. He's got his kind of cuboid kind of glass visor on. Hopefully we'll have the trailer playing whilst we do this review. When you've got a 60-year-old head, the last thing you need is a thick glassed, slightly hexagonal glass helmet on, because it accentuates the jowls, it accentuates this bit here, and it really gives a bit of this to this. And you know, I mean, I suppose no one had the courage on set to say to him, can we maybe make it, mind you, if it was round it might have made it, I don't know. We just had, he ended up looking like a character for something like Spy Kids or whatever that film was, where they all had super large heads. But it's about 50 minutes, and I have to say, I thought this sequence, at times, the soundtrack is so abstract. It's that underwater sort of industrial grind of a submarine sliding off the Great Barrier Reef underwater. The sound design in this scene is Oscar worthy. It's brilliant. It's grating. It's grinding. It's crushing, and you can feel the pressure. You can feel the water pressure. You can feel everything. And he's trying to move around it, and it's great because it's rolling, and so you have lots of kind of interior shots where he's negotiating. And what I liked about this was they spent real time with him moving through various interiors of this sub to get to where he needed to get to. I think the sense of kind of jeopardy was kind of there, but I really sat back and I really enjoyed this. I thought this was spectacle. This was true spectacle. And this was spectacle at the level of something like 2001: A Space Odyssey. I was kind of reminded at times of those great big, the great big rotating shots of the Stanley Kubrick classic. There are moments in this, and again, they're going to get lost because it's a Mission Impossible film, where I'd say the 50 minutes in the middle of this is like some of the best, almost sort of, it was kind of meditative too. I mean, it was stressful. Not really, because I think you know that Tom's going to get through this, because you know there's a whole other act. I mean, it's kind of victim of its own, he's a victim of his own success. You sort of think, well, he can't die yet. Can't have an hour of the last Mission Impossible film without. Plus, we've all seen him hanging off a biplane. We haven't seen that yet. Some obvious shit kicks in with some of these films. But I realised this, and then really, and it was at this point there was a huge, aching, dawning realisation that this film was at its best when Tom Cruise and everyone else shut the fuck up. And we just saw action. But, and there's a big but, so all this believability, all this build, all this atmospherics, all this underwaterness, all this kind of, oh yeah, I like all this. And then suddenly he tries to get out, and I'm going to kind of move through the end of the film quite quickly, because he gets out, but he strips off, and he strips out of his underwater pressure stuff. Now, I'm not, what do you call them? I'm not a zoologist, no, not a zoologist. What are they called? And I'm not an oceanographer. I'm not a deep sea diving expert. But even I know that if you strip right off at that depth, don't you get crushed and get the best? So he's naked. He's going to freeze to... I mean, there was nothing believable about him stripping off to his pants, basically, and then floating back up to the surface, at which point, obviously, we think, oh, he's under ice. What's going to happen to him? He's going to die. He can't die. We haven't seen him on a fucking biplane yet. We've seen it in the trailer. Come on, he can't die. I mean, these kind of things that are in your head. I think filmmakers need to remember. When you've seen a trailer, you're like, well, no, he doesn't die. But then the next scene is Hayley Atwell's cleavage as she's trying to kind of, resuscitate and rejuvenate him. And we're all here for that scene. It's a great moment. But it was totally unbelievable. It was stupid. And then what I thought was, he comes back. He looks pale, and she's really heaving away on top of him. And so finally she breathes life into him. And he comes around, and I think, oh my God. Ethan Hunt, aka Tom Cruise. This is the story of Christ. This is the second coming. He's died. He's got a crucifix key. He's saving the world. And so then suddenly I realised that, this really is a Tom Cruise production of a Tom Cruise film, of a Tom Cruise world. And I think if there's any problem I've got with this, it's the same problem I've had with other ones. I think the lightness of touch and a breeziness needed to be injected into this. It felt very serious. That action scene was great. The final action scene, which principally pivots around at, a sort of dogfight in the sky between two biplanes, a yellow one and I think a red one. They were good, and he's hanging off them. And I think, again, he is hanging off biplanes. When you see him hanging off a biplane, there's no one, he's hanging off a biplane. And yes, there are moments in that where you marvel at it and you think, oh my God, wow, this is incredible. He's 60 and he's doing all this sort of stuff. And yet in a weird way it was strangely and curiously anticlimactic. The whole film sort of wraps up with them all in this kind of curious situation, coming out of Trafalgar Square station, not really coming close to each other or looking at each other across the way, one by the Lion, Simon Pegg, Hayley Atwell from over here, all the various members of the team. Who else is there? Pom Clementieff as Paris. She's kind of, hey, all right, see you later. They're all kind of, waving goodbye. He rescues the world. He saves the world. There's quite a nice kind of dynamic. I quite enjoyed the drama that was going on with the president, with Angela Bassett as the president and her entourage, and Nick Offerman. He has a bit of a moment where he kind of sacrifices himself for the better good. I thought he was going to be a baddie. All of that sort of stuff kicking off. I would say that the last 2 acts of this film are by far the best. It is definitely worth sticking with the front of the film in order to get to these action scenes. But I think one of the things that ultimately let the film down is, unfortunately, dear little Tom. I mean, yes, there's a predictability about him. He really needs to do something different. And I think he has to either do something different within a vehicle like this, but just something different needs to happen. And I think Mission Impossible he's done this. He's accomplished the mission. Very successful franchise. I think this has opened very strongly in America. I think it's doing very well. But I think we've gone as far as we can. And I think if there was one thing that could have been threaded into this was, again, a few more scenes, rather than all that hour of explication at the front, just taking all that time and distributing it around the rest of the film, or the last 2 hours of the film, with a bit more meaningful kind of interaction between some of the characters. I mean, Simon Pegg didn't really bring much to it. There's a great moment where his lung is threatening to collapse and they have to jam a straw or a tube into his lungs so that he can breathe. I thought, God almighty, that was great. And I was struggling with my breathing, so I had massive relatability there. It is fun. It is distracting. The action scenes are executed beautifully and really well. The dogfight was great. I was watching it thinking, God, how have they done this? How have they actually done this? There's a great moment when Gabriel's comeuppance is brilliantly unexpected when you think he's going to escape. So all in all, yes, it delivers on the action. Yes, it delivers on the stunts. I was surprised that the part of it I enjoyed the most was the most, if you like, contemplative, abstract part of it, mindful part of it, which was underwater on the nuclear submarine on the Great Barrier Reef on the base. Lovely sound, looks, visuals. The time spent and afforded and the expertise, beautifully covered, beautifully directed, really well done. But all in all, I found it suffered from feeling it needed to be a bit more serious than it needed to be. I think when Bond is at its best, it's kind of ironic and a bit cocked eyebrow and all that kind of stuff, even in dark moments. And I think this needed to take itself less seriously. And I think that's something that is perhaps potentially a bit of a problem with Tom Cruise in general, is that he needs to not take himself so seriously. And wow, his hair, floppy, lovely. But maybe although he does all his own stunts and it's all very impressive, there wasn't that real sense that he put himself as at risk as he has in other films. Maybe he really hurt his foot when he broke it that time. Maybe he's scared himself a little bit, just a little bit. Anyway, if I was to score this, and I'm only scoring this within the terms of a genre film, an action film, I'd give it probably, the front hour was so tedious. So I'll give it 70 out of 100.